That's good.
Ready when you are, Harry.
All right. Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for taking the time out to come chat with us today about Franklin University, Switzerland. We're going to talk specifically about the Comparative Literary and Cultural Studies program here at the university. We're going to talk a bit about what the basics are of the school, but we have some wonderful faculty and students here with us today alongside us in the admissions office to really give you the full perspective as to how things work for this particular program. So this first slide here will show you just a couple of introductory slides in terms of who we are and where we're coming from, so you can figure out how to ask questions and where we're all coming from in particular for this conversation. So we have a few of us here from the admissions office. As you can see, my colleagues Petra and Catherine. I myself am Harry Herbert. I'm based here in the United States in the central U.S. and my colleagues Catherine and Petra are based in Switzerland. And we also have some students here with us today, current students on campus as far as I understand, and some of the wonderful professors that are in this particular department. So thank you so much everybody for being here today. So I like to first start talking about how wonderful it is to be in the country of Switzerland. So although I'm not currently in the country, and I think all of us can really attest to the fact that the pictures don't quite do it justice out there, am I right? It's just breathtakingly beautiful. And we're actually right next to the lakefront at Lake Lugano, right in the southern part of the country of Switzerland. So the country of Switzerland is pretty much broken down into three kind of different cultural regions. The western side is more influenced by a French culture, the northern and eastern side more German influenced, and the southern side has a strong Italian influence in its culture, but it's also very much intermixed with the Swiss and Italian culture where we are in the southern region. So you get a mixture of a bunch of different things, like the wonderful Italian cuisine and culture that is influenced there, but at the same time, the Swiss trains will run on time. You can guarantee that. So it's a really cool mixture of all these things together. And you can see at the very bottom of the screen there in that picture on the right, that's part of the campus there. So you can see where we are in relation to the city itself. The downtown portion is about 15 minutes walk or so from the campus itself. But this gives you a basic idea as to the geography and the layout. Basically, our campus is comprised of many different people from all over the world, and this is not an exaggeration. Now, we're a smaller school than many people from the United States might be used to, sitting at around 400 students on average. At the same time, these students come from all over the place. We have about 60 countries represented on our campus. So although we're smaller in number, we are wildly diverse and international, bringing together people from all corners of the world. One of the coolest things about it is that you'll see that students will speak over about 30 different languages on campus. That at the same time, everybody speaks English as the common language because at its core, this is an American and Swiss university. So basically, you'll have small class sizes, average at about 14. You're going to be able to develop very strong and personal relationships with these faculty, and you'll get to see a little bit about who they are. But at the same time, you're going to get to develop these relationships, both importantly, you getting to know them and them getting to know you. So being able to challenge you going through your program there, at the same time, developing those relationships so that you can train to what you're going to accomplish later on in your career, whether it be further academic studies or going off into the workforce. So to give you a basic introduction on admissions requirements, this is going to follow the same procedures as most United States universities. You can find us, we have our application on our website as well as on the Common application. Now from students applying from the United States, I typically advise students to apply on the Common App because most students are going to be applying to many different Common application schools, and it's very easy just to add us onto that same list. We're going to require you to submit a couple of letters of recommendation. We're going to require also your transcripts so that we can see what classes you've taken. We're going to also have to look at different aspects of your application to see how well you've prepared for your academics moving on to your post-secondary career. Keep in mind that we do a holistic review process, which means that we take into account everything involved in the application, much more than just the GPA and the test score. And it's also important to mention that we are what's called test optional, which means that you are not required to take the SAT or the ACT to qualify for both admission and or scholarship. The way I like to suggest it is, if you are proud of your scores on those and you want us to submit, if you want to submit them for us to consider them, then we will be able to take them, but they're not required for admission and or scholarship. If you have specific questions about those things, please feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to help you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Harry. So as many of you may know, Franklin follows the American liberal arts system of education. And this is always really helpful just for students to obviously be aware that they are able to apply to the university as a whole. And of course, come in possibly with an intention of knowing what it is that they want to study and pursue for their degree. It could be an opportunity to look at multiple different areas, or to, of course, come in undecided and still really take the first 2 years of your university experience to try out different courses, to work with the faculty, to really decide what it is that you're hoping to obtain your degree in. So very much this model is designed to give students the flexibility to truly learn about different areas that the university offers in order to best match up their academic majors with minors, which are smaller specializations, to truly address everything that the student is interested in studying at the university. At this time, Franklin is offering over 20 different academic majors, which you can see on the next slide. And we see a lot of different popular areas. As I said, you can certainly do combinations, but the focus of today's discussion is really going to be on our comparative literary and cultural studies. So as Harry had mentioned, we have two of our faculty members. So we are joined by Professor Fabio Ferrari as well as Professor Caroline Wiedmer. Maybe I'll just take a quick moment to allow you guys to introduce yourselves, just so we meet you a little bit, and then I'll introduce you also to the students. Caroline, would you like to start us off? Just make sure to unmute yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Caroline Wiedmer, as you just heard. I am originally from Switzerland, but at the age of 19, I think about the same age as people are when they come over here, I decided to go to the States. And I took my training there. I studied, first I studied, to be quite honest, when I took my BA, I was so confused about the American system. I ended up with an interdisciplinary studies BA. So really I did zoology, I did literature, I did all kinds of things. But by the end, I'd settled on literature. And because I knew quite a few languages and because I was interested in comparative literature, that's what I went on to do in graduate school. And then I took my first job at the University of Washington in Germanic studies and decided I really wanted to come back to comparative literature. And so that's what I did. I came back to Switzerland. And here then at Franklin, I found a job which was really perfect for me, combining both American and my Swiss heritage.
Fantastic. Professor Ferrari, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I also came to comparative literature because of an international background. My parents are Italian, but my father was a professor of art at the University of Chicago, where at the time there was just an English department and where we did mostly English literature. I went to the University of Chicago starting in nursery school and ended up with a PhD there. So I was very happy to see when things expanded, when we started doing Caribbean literature, when we started doing Italian literature outside of the constraints of just the British, dominance that had kind of ruled over English for so long. And as a result, I got my degree in Romance languages and literatures, where I worked across multiple languages and cultures. And of course, that's perfect for where I am today in Switzerland and for this university, where we have so many international students and who love storytelling, who love literature, who love film. We work across languages and media, and it's a really exciting place for that.
Fantastic. And we're also joined by two of our current students. Martina, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Martina. I'm a senior at Franklin, and my major is obviously CLCS with political science.
Great. And Keely?
Hi, I'm Keely. I'm a senior as well, and my major is CLCS.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So what we really wanted to touch on today is with the professors and the students is to have a better feel in terms of what does it actually mean to study comparative literary and cultural studies. As you can hear, we abbreviated to CLCS. So professors, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the actual major, what you study, and maybe kind of what kind of students would be attracted to studying this particular major at university?
Fabio, do you want to start? Shall I start?
You know, just to segue just a little bit off of my own introduction, there is the comparative literature part, and then there's the cultural studies part. So for Europeans who maybe studied literature in high school, specifically Italians who may be listening, what we do is nothing like what you were doing in high school in Italy. And I say that because literature has a very kind of traditional sound to it still in Italy. And I think if I think back to my own training, what comparative literature does, as I tried to allude to before, is that we work across languages and across cultures, oftentimes focusing in on a topic. We try to keep it very contemporary and very relevant for the students as much as possible. And we're constantly updating our program to try to stay with the times. So the professional pathways you see here are actually the work of mostly the chair, Professor Wiedmer. And this is a way to kind of respond also to an increasing need for interdisciplinarity, but also for a clear professional pathway. I don't know, Caroline, if you want to speak more about cultural studies and these pathways specifically.
Sure. I mean, I can back up maybe a few steps here. So we start with the question about storytelling, right? How are stories told in literature? You know, what are the elements that go into it? What are the functions of literature? What are the functions of stories? And then we go outside of literature and we start looking around at that culture. We start looking around at different realms in culture. So for instance, we look at food, we look at human rights, we look at law, and we look at performance, right? So how did stories get used? What is their function in these various kinds of areas? We have many other areas, of course, too, right? We look at memory. What else do we look at, Fabio? Or actually the students, maybe Keely and Tini, you've taken classes. What do we look at?
Well, for me, I actually have all my classes written down here.
Okay.
So I took, with you, Professor Wiedmer, I took a culture and human rights class, as well as, I mean, I've taken the French cultural institutions class that I really enjoyed with Professor Roy, critical race studies in a global context. So in that, we were looking at critical race studies in America and in France as well. Right now, I'm in a language and culture class. So yeah, we really look at all of these things that kind of create a culture and as well as affects it. And literature obviously plays a huge role in that.
Yeah, thank you. Tini, you want to? Yep.
We kind of look at as has been discussed, we'll look at culture, we'll also look at the relevance in contemporary settings and sort of the historic factors as to why things are the way they are. So I'm not a history major or minor in any sense of the way, but the classes give you a strong foundational backing as to, for example, in the enslaved course I took, what is the history that is built to the evolution of how there's certain issues that are formed in society and they're framed by historic events. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, so we look at everything, as you said, Tini, within its own context, right? Within its own cultural context, but also within its own historical context. And that's really important to us, yeah.
We have a lot of film classes, and in fact, CLCS is closely aligned with our film studies minor. And I know that in the Italian film studies classes that I teach, which Catherine, before working at Franklin, was a student here and was in the Italian film studies class in one of its first iterations. But we really like to break down the shots into different symbols and icons and signs and and to do a kind of a semiotic, what we call a semiotic analysis of what looks just like a very neutral image or a very neutral story, a story maybe about a child growing up. And you see that it's really imbued with a lot of ideology. We like our students to be able to read between the lines and to decode images, decode film, decode texts, so that they're critical thinkers and informed thinkers.
So in other words, we use literature to look at the world, right? And to really take it outside of the classroom as well, and to experience, you know, what's going on and be able to read it in a nuanced fashion.
Perfect. I think that's very clear. Obviously, I think honing in a lot of the kind of skills in terms of the interdisciplinary study that we see with this particular major. Do you see, just kind of observation of different students in your classes, that there's a certain student that I guess, you know, kind of hones in on this particular area? Is it that they come with a lot of literature, of understanding cultures? Do they need to necessarily know anything beforehand? Or is this something maybe that they discover as they start taking your courses at Franklin?
I think really we've had both types of students. You know, students who came here and wanted to study business. Tina, you have a story like that. Although I don't think it was business. In any case, right? So you come here and you want to do something totally different, right? And then you take a class, you fall in love with the way of to see the world, the kind of the lens that we offer. Of course, not everybody. Only very special students do that. Often students who are very curious, students who also want to be able to think critically, students who want to be able to have good arguments, you know, students who want to really get to the bottom of things. Yeah.
Our classes are very discussion based. I would say they're for people who love to read. There is a lot of film and images, you know, that we look at as well. But I would say our classes are for people who love to read and discuss ideas. So it's the kind of very happy merger between what might have been a philosophy class, you know, 15 or 20 years ago, updated to more contemporary theories that deal with gender, race, class, sexuality.
Yeah. Keely and Teeny, do you want to say something? I mean, how do you see yourself? Do you fit into these molds that we've just been describing?
I would say that it's definitely, the course and the classes are definitely engaging. So it's not sort of passive learner, it's a very active style of learning. And I found that best for me because something like the topics and contexts in which I've learned in class, because of the way that they're set up, I have left and I'm not forgetting the content like I have in, say, you know, business classes or things like that, where the kind of students are placed at the center with the help of the professors to just give your opinions and learn how to articulate and things like that properly. And that's what I was looking for. So that was really good.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm sorry, Keely, I interrupted you.
It's okay, it's okay. I was just gonna say, I really respond to the discussion-based aspect of these classes because I think with the topics we're talking about, we can't really form opinions on them unless we're able to hear others, and then being able to be in a classroom and talk it out, talk about these differing opinions, and either, I wouldn't say like you don't choose sides, but either maybe merging one or just, it's one of the best ways to learn. So that's something I really enjoyed about the major. Yeah.
I don't know, we read a lot in pedagogy about how people learn best, and it's true that sometimes the topic itself, you know, what you read disappears with the years. But if the learning is embodied in some way, if you can kind of become passionate about what it is that you're saying, that feeling somehow stays with you. And if you can become passionate about a social justice issue or just a story that you're learning about. One class that I teach deals with AIDS era New York and stories that were coming out of Manhattan during the beginning of the AIDS crisis. People may not remember the details of the stories that we read, but as students perform their own stories on stage, all of the nerves, everything that goes into their own performances and that storytelling experience, I think stays with them for a long time. This is what alumnus will tell me. And of course, their careers may not have anything to do with theater, but when you're standing in front of a room of people in a presentation and you get those butterflies, you have that resource to pull from, and that confidence, of having been through something much more difficult than a PowerPoint presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And maybe that's a great segue. Exactly what we kind of wanted to hear from both of our faculty members and things like that is just more particular your passions, kind of where your research has also taken you, because I'm sure this certainly has a very strong impact on the students and the way that they see you in the classroom.
Let's see. So I'm working right now on two different kind of major projects. One has to do with refugee studies and migration studies. And there I'm looking in particular at Europe and how Europe has become this fortress, since the 15-16 crisis. And how really it's kind of right now, what I'm looking at right now is how it's really been almost made invisible after the Corona crisis has started, right? We have no idea what's going on, or at least it's no longer in the press, so we have the feeling that we have no idea what's going on right now with migration and refugees. So that's the one thing I'm looking at. Another thing I'm looking at is the so-called environmental humanities. And there I'm looking at how biodiversity, the story of biodiversity is told here in Switzerland, but also in Europe as a whole, and how that story might lead to certain kinds of actions, or rather what I'm finding, inaction, in terms of how you might protect the environment a bit better. So those are maybe two things that I'm looking at. I mean, another thing that I think, Fabio, you and I are both passionate about is learning. And, this idea of how knowledge might best be translated into action, into other people's head. How do we present a class so that people can actually really participate and develop something of their own, and perhaps even develop kind of a habit of mind, which doesn't stop at a first stop, an easy answer, but goes on and is then able to also use that as a resource.
Yeah, I mean, one area that of research that I'm active in is in happiness studies, which started off as a first-year seminar a few years back, when we saw that people. And it's hard to imagine, kind of a pre-COVID anxiety. What were we anxious about before coronavirus? But there was a lot of anxiety post 2008. There was already a crisis, economic crisis that maybe people who are applying to college today, their parents were experiencing struggles of different kinds around the world. And happiness became a chief concern. These subjects had not traditionally been taught at universities, but became the most popular class at Harvard, the most popular class at MIT. And we were there experimenting with that as well. How the story of happiness is told, and how the story of how to get happiness, how to acquire happiness, needs to be looked at with the same critical eye that we would look at anything else. Anything that we want to believe in, be it religion or politics, joy, family, things that we believe are just full of positivity, do need, however, a critical eye. And I think that the past few years with the students in those happiness classes, we've seen that there's a lot of interesting work to be done.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn it over to the students a little bit. And I know you spoke a little bit about if the student spoke to you per se that our faculty was describing, but can you tell us a little bit more about your interests and experiences that you had in high school that perhaps maybe led you here? Maybe we start with Keely?
Yeah, I had a bit of like I would say a different experience as the LCS major because I transferred into Franklin. But in high school, like I'd always been a very avid fan of literature and discussing literature. Those were always my favorite classes. And I think for comparative literature, it's just, I had my high school education in the States, so it was very, as I was saying before, it was very British related, very kind of a one focus and a one mind. So when I came to Franklin and I saw comparative and I saw this idea of looking at literature that's not just through this one, I'd say factory of a way of thinking, I jumped at the chance to take those classes as well. Yeah, I mean, I had other interests in high school that didn't really pertain to CLCS as well, but they all kind of, I mean, they all led me here. So here we are.
Thank you. How about you, Teeny?
Yeah, I studied, I mean, the closest I think I studied to CLCS, I was in the British system. So again, it was quite rigid, quite regimented. I wanted to go to because obviously in a system like that, that is a subject you're going to study or read. And to actually engage in that I found of further interest for further study or further, you know, what I might want to pursue in a career. With high school, I did my A-levels in art history, literature, and economics and business, so I had quite a varied scope. I would say that the art history and literature side have kind of helped to an extent with CLCS in terms of my own kind of foundation, like giving me the foundation and understandings as to why we are reading things and why we are analyzing things. And I mean, I think business and econ will kind of give you that common sense to apply things to the real world as well, you know, just common ways of thinking. Interest, I wasn't very sporty, so yeah, I mean, not much, but yeah, that was pretty much it.
Thank you. So I know you've both kind of talked about this a little bit, but what drew you to the CLCS major? And maybe Teeny, I know you have a story because you didn't, as you mentioned, start out as CLCS, and why the combination of CLCS and poli-sci? Do you want to kick us off?
So yeah, I transferred into Franklin and I was adamant to study economics after my first semester, and after taking a food travel class, which was the CLCS class, I was like, okay, this is what I'm actually passionate about. This is something I can really engage in. It was the conversations, the discussion, the content, it was something I really enjoyed. So I switched to science. I think they're complementary because of political science, sort of analyzing political organizations, political behavior, and you can then use the cultural relevance of that you learn in CLCS to analyze societal behavior as a whole. So that for me is fundamental and a crucial skill that I know throughout with the majors I'll be able to take forward.
Thank you. Keely, how about you?
So one thing I think I was really interested and drawn to was the versatility of the major. Not only, I would say, in the classroom and the classes that you can take, but also after university, after graduation. As well, I mean, as I said, like how it's discussion based mainly, but also I think Franklin, like when I was looking into Franklin as a school, one thing I really noticed is that we promote this idea of becoming a global citizen. And I think with the CLCS major, it's one of the best. I mean, all the majors are really good for it, of course, but I think it is one of the best majors for it because you're really looking at the world, at what it means to be a citizen in either of the world or in all these different contexts that we talk about in class.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to direct this next question back to the faculty. So as Petra had mentioned, we are a liberal arts university, meaning you don't need to necessarily declare your major once you have arrived at Franklin, and we encourage you to try out a variety of courses to see kind of what speaks to you, as the students have also spoken to. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your role as advisors and how you help the students maybe either in deciding or once they have decided on CLCS, how to navigate the rest of their college careers. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'm pretty active as an advisor for the core in the first years because I teach often the first year seminar, which is a required class of all first year students. And as I was mentioning before, the topic in the past couple of years has been happiness, but we've also looked at other political topics, or again, I work also in film, so there have been some film studies. The idea is to really get to know the student in the classroom in order to see their strengths and be able to advise them better than, for instance, my experience, if I think back to being a college student, was that I would pop in to see my advisor at the beginning of a semester or at the end of a semester, and I didn't develop the kind of relationship with them that I do with my students because I see them 2 or 3 times a week in class. And if they're having difficulties of any kind, I can pretty much pick them out and bring them to the office, and we can, chat about what is going on and really, attend to those challenges which naturally come up in a first semester of university, especially when you're far away from home, learning a new language. All of those growing pains do go away, and students mature very quickly into something like a global citizen. And by the end of the 4 years, that really manifests itself in such an incredible way for most of our students. It's a wonderful process to participate in, and I think that really what I try to get students to do, to think about, is that it's not as fast as it is on Instagram or on social media. The change takes work, and it takes commitment, and it takes discipline. It takes getting out of the dorm room and going on getting on the train and exploring with their friends. There's a lot of exploration, but that's not going to happen through your telephone. You really have to get out in the world and stumble with the languages that you're learning and try out the ideas that you're learning in the classroom. So I'm really almost, I feel a bit like, I don't know if my advisees perceive me this way, but I see my role almost as a kind of a coach, throughout the 4 years, to keep people out there experimenting and exploring so they make the most of their 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, you've basically said everything. I often get, or at least in the last maybe 3 years or so, I have not been teaching one of those intro classes. So when students come to me, they've already decided basically that they want to do CLCS, which is always delightful, obviously. But at that point, what I see my role as being is to really be as flexible as we pretend that we are, right? Make sure that I really listen to what students need, where they want to go, where they might want to end up, where they're having difficulties, and figure out solutions. How can they really pursue CLCS in a way that gives them the largest breadth, but also depth, right? How can they go and do an internship? How can they be double or combine majors with whatever else? How can we figure these things out? So I often find myself simply being a solution finder together with the student. Yeah. And
I
also,
think, Caroline, those professional pathways are just examples.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it comes out of your and our commitment as a major to be flexible and to cluster together courses that students naturally gravitate towards. So if you want to take those art history classes and you want to think about art history in comparison with or in contrast with your political science classes, we encourage that. We want the major to be flexible enough to be able to make something out of that.
Yeah. And I think one really important point here too is that we don't only have, these are examples of 4 areas in which people could study, but we also encourage people to come up with their own clusters, right? So if you say, well, I'm not interested in food or human rights or any of that stuff, right? I'd like to do my own thing. Then we say, fine, Let's sit down together and define what it is you want to do, see what other courses might fit, what kind of internship you might do, and so on. So we're really very much about being flexible, right? About allowing people to
Self-design.
as well. Yeah, self-design, exactly.
I like that, helping people to explore, self-design, and problem solvers.
Exactly, because that's what we need in the world, right? That's what you need to be able to do once you graduate.
Beautiful transition. What do we need in the world?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what types of career paths that you prepare your students for?
Well, we have students, I mean, students go in many different directions. And I think that, you know, as we all probably know, career paths have really changed over the last 20 years, right? Students don't graduate in, let's say, accounting, and then they're accountants until they're 65 when they retire. That's just not how it works anymore, right? People have between 4, 5, 6 different kinds of careers during their lifetime, during their working lifetime. And so what we want to do is really prepare people to do all kinds of things, right? So some people go to grad school, and we've had a great track record getting people into really good places like Cambridge, like Columbia, like Emerson, like, you know, so we try to help people, those people who really want to continue to pursue an aspect of CLCS, be that in literature or do gender studies or whatever it is they want to do, or whatever combination they had, we're able to help them do that. And then others are more interested in publishing or journalism or law even. We have a brand new pre-law, what is it, a minor? It's a minor, right? Which CLCS has been also involved in creating. And so we really want to be as open as possible, you know, because really what we're trying to do is allow people to, and using kind of the tools of narratology, that is to say storytelling, to see how the world functions. And so that really helps in all areas of the world.
Absolutely. Professor Ferrari, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I think that, you know, our students are very outspoken. They learn to express their opinions clearly and concisely, but also without mincing words. I think that kind of directness is something that we cultivate through our through the theoretical readings, you know, which are not, it's not again the kind of vague philosophy, you know, of abstraction and clouds. We're looking at tough problems that are going on in the world today, and we're doing our best to respond to them in the classroom so that when people go out into the world, they will seek out those professions where they can make a difference. And we don't really pretend to know what those professions are going to be in 5 or 10 years, because we surrender to the fact that times are moving very quickly, technology is moving very quickly, and managers, you know, at companies are telling us, prepare your students for anything and everything, but make sure that they know how to read, write, and think critically. So we really, in CLCS, embrace fully these liberal arts philosophy, and you know, just try to keep it current and keep students thinking on their toes.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback off of that for a moment and just talk about some of the soft skills that LinkedIn says are essential, what the companies are looking for in 2020. And so soft skills are the essential interpersonal skills that make or break your ability to get things done, and then also in your current work, and then also look for new opportunities. So you might see that, you know, 4 of the 5 of these skills have actually been on the list for many years that LinkedIn publishes, which shows that we will, you know, it's kind of evergreen. Companies will continue to seek out talent that are creative, persuasive, collaborative, and adaptable, for example. The skill that changed this year was emotional intelligence, which I think can show us that companies are truly gravitating towards talent that has these interpersonal skills and these people-oriented skills. And I truly do believe, Professor Ferrari mentioned earlier, I'm an alum of Franklin myself. I truly believe that Franklin, and specifically, I didn't do CLCS myself, but can really prepare you to be this type of a thinker, to be this type of a collaborator, to have that emotional intelligence. And
if I could say, Catherine, you were
of course,
and still are a beautiful speaker of Italian. And when I mentioned, embodied knowledge, that is something that you carry with you for the rest of your life. When you inhabit a language, you cross a boundary, you cross a border, and you become a citizen of two worlds.
absolutely.
Intelligence is really about that navigation of multiple worlds, being able to empathize to the extent that you lose who you think you were by becoming constantly putting yourself in a point of reference, which is that of othering yourself, of becoming other. So I think of you, and your own journey as really an example of emotional intelligence at work.
Thank you. And, just to piggyback off of, the language skills, right? I think that speaks beautifully also to the cultural piece, because you can't just learn words or translations. You have to know the context in which they're speaking, or we have in English, it's raining cats and dogs, things like that, expressions, idioms. But anyways, I did want to ask if the students, if Keely or if Teeny, if you had anything to say about these soft skills, or maybe what you've been learning at Franklin?
Sure. I mean, especially with emotional intelligence, the LCS in particular, because it is so contextually based, makes you have that, I want to say, cultural intelligence to an extent. And being at Franklin in itself, it's so international, you're exposed to so many different cultures. So for me, that sort of, there's a link between emotional and cultural, if I can say intelligence. By no means am I an expert in any way, but it's kind of like the beginnings, giving you that beginning for it. Yeah, I mean, creativity, reading them, it's sort of what embodies not just Franklin, but as well, 100%. You're given different pieces to read from different times, and you're collaborating with your classmates to say, okay, well, how are they all connected? What is the red thread between them? What's the red thread within this issue, with this scenario? So that, that's something that's both creative, both collaborative, and you have to adapt to the different cultures and contexts in which you're learning as well.
Thank you. Keely, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think with adaptability, it's kind of inherent when you come to Franklin, because especially for people who didn't live in Switzerland or didn't live in Europe before, or even if they did live in Europe, it's kind of like, oh, here we are, in a new country or a new city, or and you're also kind of adapting to the way that maybe some of your classmates are going to view what you're saying, or the way that your views are, and then that goes in with collaborating with them to say, okay, well, I think of it this way because, and then kind of breaking it down, thinking, oh, I think this way because of these lessons that I learned growing up, or because I was in this kind of environment growing up. Yeah, and I think creativity plays a big part in the CLCS major. I don't know if you guys can hear that, sorry. In the CLCS major as well, just with how I and how really changes work with whatever you want, with whatever you're passionate about.
Thank you. So next, the big fun question. What do you plan to do once you graduate? Either can start.
So I'm planning to take my LSATs to apply for law school. That's 50% of the option. The other 50% is to try and stay in Switzerland and carry on postgraduate studies in human rights or development studies.
Wonderful, thank you.
I've been looking at a lot, especially this summer, which I will be talking with Professor Beekmer about. She's my advisor. But I've always, like growing up, I always wanted to work in the Peace Corps, and that's kind of moved into UNESCO. especially since coming to Franklin. Yeah, that's the dream, I guess you could say. I've always always going into publishing.
Wonderful. All right, next I'm going to transition it back to Harry.
Yeah, so one of the most unique and integral parts of the experience at Franklin is integrating travel into the curriculum, what we call academic travel. So one of the most important elements of being a student at Franklin is really being able to, of course, safety permitting, being able to experience all of the different types of cultures and other types of things going on in different countries that are in and around the country of Switzerland. The fact that Switzerland is in the heart of Western Europe, it really acts as a foundational launch pad for you to be able to explore different parts of the world very well. So very commonly, students will integrate travel into their social and academic experiences. So part of what we do is basically, just to back it up for a structural explanation, the US structure for university is basically 2 semesters, and within that 5 courses per semester. Each semester will include 1 academic travel course. This will include a 2-week on average travel experience to a different country to incorporate the boots on the ground experience to also figure out how that stuff works with how you're talking about those subjects in the classroom. So you're really getting to see how all of these different theories and practices are taking place in their cultural contexts. And so really you're going to enhance the conversations that you're having in the classroom and from the information you're learning from books and conversations with your professors and your classmates. So academic travel is really one of the core aspects, as I mentioned, and it happens every single semester. One of the other fantastic elements is that the travel portions of these courses, the costs of which are included in the tuition. So you know that you're not having to break the bank every single semester to really take part in these wonderful experiences. And so I think that we'll get some examples here from our faculty and students as to how this specifically works.
Okay, well, I see one picture of one of my travels, so maybe I'll jump in here. What you're seeing here is Berlin. You're seeing the Brandenburg Gate on the left-hand side, and what you see on the right hand is, do I get that? Yeah, anyway, is the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. And this was a travel about the memory of the Holocaust and how it manifests almost geographically, topographically, how it is inscribed in the very urban setting of Berlin itself. I mean, as we know, much, there is very much to remember in Berlin. You can almost, you can't go 5 meters without seeing some sort of plaque, memorial, Stolze, called Stolpersteine, which is stumbling blocks, which are kind of tiles in the floor. I mean, this is a place that is really rife with memory. And so what we went to do there is to look exactly how not only a city, but a country really can come to terms with its murderous past, and how that expresses itself in memorials, in museums, with people we talk to on the street in part, but also politicians whom we also speak to, how that is expressed in art. We go to museums. We simply walk around, we talk to school classes. And so at the end, and what we then heard there in Berlin, or always, I've been doing this travel for maybe 10 years now. So every time we go, we hear myriads of stories. They're not all the same, right? Memory is different for every person. And so that is one of the things that we're trying to get at when we study memory.
Thank you. And we included a link here as well to a YouTube video that gives you an insider's peek at this travel for Berlin, Inventing the Past.
Okay.
Tini, I think you said that European food systems was the travel that changed your mind or encouraged you to become a CLCS major. Can you talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so that was a fantastic travel. That was the first travel I took with SSB. And basically it's sort of about like multifaceted, but it was about, let's say from the basis, how food cuisine in itself has a lot of cultural relativeness that we would think about, like social hierarchical structures, you know, links like that. And then about, I think it's you are what you eat. So, you know, especially now with sort of the MDGs and sustainable sort of development movement and how we need to incorporate and change our eating habits to suit the sort of environments we're living in to eat locally. And that's what it focused on. So that was great. And to sort of put that into practice, we went and went post Chiavo, learned how to make some cheese, like local Italian cheese. Then we went to Bergamo and we went to a beautiful place called Valcamonica in the like mountain region, I think in Italy. And we stayed on a goat farm, which is my favorite part because me and some other students got off at like 5, 6 a.m. to go and help with the cows and see some goats and some snails. Within the local community. And it was just very interesting to see how these local communities, they really thrive off eating locally within themselves. So, I mean, even now, for example, earlier today I went to the fishmonger and they were like, oh, you know, do you want salmon? I was like, actually, it's not local. It's not from here. It's frozen and it's imported. I'll have the local food because that is what is more sustainable. That's kind of the way in which we have to think about adapting our consumer habits. But yeah, so that travel gave me a whole insight into that. And it was just, yeah, it's really fantastic.
Thank you. So we know that, or experiential learning, right, doesn't just have to happen while you're on academic travel. And so I'm wondering if we can have you all speak to, you know, what is experiential learning to you? Perhaps we can start with Professor Ferrari.
Sure. I mean, this does happen on, sometimes academic travel does influence the pedagogy overall at Franklin because experiential learning necessarily happens when you're doing field work. So in a film class, whether it's we take it on the road or whether we're doing it in the classroom, what I like to do, given that, you know, we're all consumers of media, but we don't necessarily all gravitate towards those black and white movies made in Italy during the 1960s that I love so much because they speak volumes about you know, what Italy has become today. They're very fragile stories. It's a question of cultural heritage and wanting to pass down the importance of the craftsmanship around these films, the beauty of Italian filmmaking. But in order to get that story across, in order to get that message across, I like to have students pick up their cell phones, move into the garden to pastiche, to adapt the films that we're watching, and to make something. Making is of crucial importance in terms of putting knowledge into practice and then it becoming embodied in the way that I was saying before. Those short films will not be of the same quality as a film by Federico Fellini, but by reaching for that ideal, by attempting to make a film, you realize its difficulty, the technical challenges, and you have a different appreciation for the craftsmanship than you would if you were just reading about it.
Thank you. Keely, what about you?
I think for me, it's especially with in the context of academic travel, it's kind of arriving to a place to learn about it without any, let go of a lot of preconceived notions, especially, I mean, just I've found that, I mean, if you can't understand the language of wherever you are, I found that just truly listening to what the people are willing to tell you about either their experiences being there or their experiences interacting with the cultural impact it's had on them is also very important. I think a good example of this would be last fall through the CLCS 350 Long Culture class I took, myself and a couple of other students went to the United Nations Human Rights Social Forum. And they were focusing on promotion and protection of youth in education, which is something that, I mean, through that class before, I kind of found that I felt very passionate about. And it was because I'd always been fascinated by the UN. I mean, obviously with UNESCO, I've always wanted to work with them. And so kind of being able to go to Geneva in October for that conference and kind of sit and listen and be an active part of it too, and ask my questions and have a dialogue with those panel members was, it's something that, I mean, I'd never really thought I'd be able to do, especially at a university level or any other university I was looking at. Yeah, I think that's the experience that's kind of stuck out the most to me.
Thank you for sharing. How about you, Professor Wiedmer?
Well, it's really what many people have been saying, I think, in other words. You take abstracts or you know, conceptions, theories that you learn in class, and you go and see how it really acts out or works itself out in the world. You know, how other people talk about it. You know, there's never only one story, right? We know that. And so we try to go out into the world and see, you know, aside from the theories that we read and that we grapple with, you know, what do other people talk about when they talk about the same thing, when they talk about memory, when they talk about human rights? Yeah, you know, how do other people think about it? And then how, you know, if we look, for instance, specifically at laws, how are theories that we read about, how do they manifest in laws? And what in turn is then the effect that these laws have on people, on real human beings? And how does that change from place to place to place? Right? So in other words, it's not only about getting your hands dirty in a way. But Bobby, I agree with you. It's really important also to do things, you know. But it's really also about understanding kind of the complexity of something, the depth of something. So for me, it's really about deep learning. And when I hear the word experiential learning, it's really about also involving your senses in a way, you know, and also involving, you brought it up earlier, emotional intelligence, you know, and you need that when you talk to other people and when you interact with other people and you try to understand what their point of view is. Yeah.
Thank you. Teeny, do you have anything to add?
Just the only thing I can add is that it's quite a transcendent experience, in my opinion, and academic travel in itself is just incredible experience. That is kind of what's the word when something's stained into your memory? It's kind of it's something that will remain, and I believe that learning experiences that will just sort of be very reminiscent throughout as I sadly get older. Yes.
Thank you. All right, so as we are just finishing up here, I know we've had a lot of information, so wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. Or is there anything else that any of our esteemed panelists, professors, faculty, students would like to add?
You know, just perhaps one thing has come up, but only obliquely in a way. Comparative literature and cultural studies is also about languages and integrating languages and using languages and learning about languages. So we very much support that, you know, and Fabio, you spoke earlier about being able to enter two worlds, really, if you have that. It's really a gift to yourself. And when we're talking about gifts to yourself, and maybe Keely, you're not going to agree, and Teeny, but really one of the ultimate gifts I think we give students at Franklin and CLCS is a thesis at the end. You know, they write a thesis and that then becomes their topic. They're then the experts, right? Of course, we help them with their first readers and second readers and advisors and so on. But, you know, when you actually sit down and write something between 40 and 70 pages and you come up with the conception for it and the topic for it and you do the research, you take that with you into the world. You know, you have something to talk about and you have something to be really, really proud about. And I'm really proud that we do that in CLCS. Not all the majors do that. Many, however, do that. And I think that's one of the really wonderful things that is disappearing other places, because perhaps the professor-student ratio is not such that it's very time intensive, right? but we take that time, and we're always extremely proud of our students. And you two, it will be your turn next year, right? Anyway.
Yeah, and you see the thesis really mature throughout the coursework with students. An idea may start in the second year with a short presentation, and then develop into an internship just by chance or apparently by chance, and then turn into a full-blown project in the senior year. And I've seen those senior projects become calling cards for graduate schools and door openers at graduate schools, where people can really talk with some expertise, for bachelors about very complex issues that reflect so intrinsically on what makes that specific student an individual. At a very deep level about what they care about and what they're willing to work towards. So I think that's, if university is a time to, go out and read and discover the world, it's also about getting to know yourself in this way that wouldn't be possible if you stayed home. And going out into the world at Franklin with a CLCS major makes that kind of deep learning that Professor Wiedmer was talking about not only possible, but necessary. So I really encourage everyone to at least take one CLCS class, and then you'll see that you may get hooked like some of the other students here.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful place, I think, to end. I didn't see any questions come in. Just wanted to remind everybody that you can continue the conversation from our website. We have a feature where you can chat with students like the ones that we talked to today, but also from other areas as well. And with that, I will thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.